rights, the classical cases being France and England, or sequential. Economic development took place under an authoritarian political regime and democratization followed, Italy, Germany, and in some sense, Russia. In India, on the contrary, the sequential model has been followed but in reverse. A democratic constitution was instituted in 1951 over an impoverished agrarian economy in which the vast majority of the population was, and still is, the rural poor. So India faces the challenge of economic development within a democratic framework, quite unlike most of the Asian tiger economies, including emergent China, that experienced rapid economic growth in the latter half of the 20th century and early 21st. Socially, or rather sociologically, India has had a very distinctive making of what one calls the democratic subject. In the West, as is extensively documented, since the end of the 16th century, the moral autonomy of the individual in the Kantian sense superseded the bonding and the bindings of the pre-modern communities. This created a unique social space where deliberation and communication driven by particular interests was thought possible. Habermas called it a new public sphere, and Tocqueville found it in the burgeoning civic communities of American towns in the first half of the 19th century. In India, the forces of modernity, of democracy, did not accompany such individuation of the society. So communities, not the individual, caste, not class, politics of identity, not associational rationality, that continue to make the principal agents of Indian democracy. To comprehend the character of this democracy, therefore, it's necessary to set the strategic lens of community in an appropriate place. Conceptually, the anatomy of India's democratic politics is very different from especially the liberal conception of civil society. An institutional space for political parties, trade unions, business and professional associations, cultural civil rights groups, non-governmental organizations, etc., in which solidarities are made on the basis of contingent and specific interests. These groups and collectivities offer a wide variety of channels for social transactions outside the state, but inside the legal procedural relations of the polity. They in fact limit the state, make a strong base for public criticism, and in the course of their operation democratize the society at large. It's not surprising, therefore, that just with the collapse of authoritarian structures of socialism in Soviet Union and Eastern Europe in the late 1980s and early 1990s, an earnest search for civil society erupted in political theory. Re-evaluations in particular of John Locke, of Adam Smith and Scottish Enlightenment, of Hegel, Marx and Gramsci informed our understanding of a great intellectual tradition in this period. In India, on the contrary, civil society as a conceptual tool does not help us much to understand what we may call democracy's osmosis in larger society. Civil society here exists either as a thin upper crust of social body or is powerless in much of political deliberation. In effect, the civil society consists by and large of the metropolitan elite and the educated, mostly English-speaking people. An exclusive ring made of the citizens who are conscious of their rights to speech, property and association. The bulk of the sweating, toiling Indians in the fields and the factories, shop floors and small-scale informal service economy, more than 90% of the Indian workforce, living in remote villages or wretched slums and surviving on less than $1 a day in excruciating poverty and acute vulnerability, do not belong to the enchanted club. They make the vernacular society, have a different grammar of politics, a different language of communication, and a different set of principles for association. To use the conventional prism of civil society for understanding the participation of these segments in India's democratic processes can only offer a very narrow and elitist perspective. We will have more to say on this later. Having placed India's democracy within three distinctive dimensions of history, sociology, and theory, I will now draw our attention to four distinct paradoxes where you would find these dimensions grounded. My aim here is to show how these apparent contradictions, when probed systematically, actually help us develop a more complicated understanding of this giant of a country's incredibly complex political processes. Please pardon some simplifications that I will attempt in the following paragraphs. Without them, I'm afraid I'll fail to carry this short presentation to any intelligible end. First, let us take the question of religion in politics, of secularism. Conventional wisdom suggests that secular claim to politics lies in its advocacy for delinking the will of the state from the nature of religious faith, of treating citizens uniformly, irrespective of differences in their belief, of establishing certain codes and practices in public life that can be considered as universal in a minimalist sense. In India, secularism means something very different. Here, the state is routinely invoked to resolve religious bottlenecks. The constitution guarantees certain religious rights and prohibits certain practices in the name of religion. In moments of interreligious tension and violent clashes, which in India is called communal violence, the ability of the state to protect the minority is considered crucial. While India experienced the most brutal violence between the religious groups at the time of partition, the spate of violence on communal lines, in fact, has gone considerably up since the Constitution adopted the 42nd Amendment in 1976, which introduced secular as a category in describing the republic in the body of the Constitution. So instead of a detachment of the political processes from the religious, secularism in India survives on a close proximity between the two, precisely because politics is interspersed with the formation of religious identities. The debates within secularism and between secular and the communal politics in India are truly rich and multifaceted. I have no room here for their elaboration today. For the sake of clarity, let me just mention the broad positions in the debate. The first are what may be called the Nehruvian secularists, which also include the democratic left, who believe that the religious groups should have a good deal of autonomy within a space of public tolerance and respect for each other. The ultimate responsibility for maintaining peace between communities lies with the state and the secular political parties, which should strive to guarantee the rights of the minorities. This view has come under criticism mainly from the communitarians, who claim that the state, on accounts of its nationalism, is likely to treat any critical voice against the generic interests of the state as anti-national. Besides, given the history of intimate link between Indian nationalism and Hindu imageries, especially during the first half of 20th century, and this includes some of Gandhi's lexicons as well, for instance, Ram Rajya, or the kingdom of Ram, the hero of the epic of the Hindu epic Ramayana, which Gandhi considered as an ethically desirable normative pursuit. The communitarians argued, because of such linkages, the minority religions cannot accept the state in an unqualified way, especially with respect to matters these communities consider internal to their faith. So the suggestion is to produce a space where the communities can engage in a dialogue with each other without any direct intervention of the state for resolving the knotty issues affecting communal peace. There's a third stream of anti-secularists in India, intellectually alive and posing difficult questions. They argue that secularism as an ideology has failed in the subcontinent because it is culturally alien, politically coercive, enforced by the state, and more harmful than capable of maintaining social peace between